Anita was so happy to see Daniel in her home. He had come to see her mother to declare his intentions in marrying her. Her mother welcomed him warmly. They discussed for a few minutes before her mother told Daniel to come with her. Anita was confused as she wondered where they were going. To her utmost surprise, her mother took Daniel to her dirty room, which had not been cleaned in months, remnant of food items. Particles and dirty clothes could be seen littering all over the place. Daniel walked into the room, looking so disgusted and disappointed. "My daughter is such a dirty girl," her mother said to Daniel, who gazed through the room bitterly to see how dirty everywhere looked. Anita was so bewildered, she could not believe that her own mother could air her dirty linen before the man who have come to ask for her hands in marriage. Daniel turned to Anita in disgust and asked, "How can a beautiful girl like you could live comfortably in such a dirty place?" Anita saw how disgusted he looked. Daniel shook his head and told her mother that he can no longer marry Anita. Anita could feel her heart dropped. As she watched Daniel walk out of their house with his brothers, she ran as fast as she could to plead with him to change his mind. But Daniel had to inform her that he was not willing to marry a pig for a wife. Anita was heartbroken and in tears. She returned to confront her mother, who seemed not to be bothered by all that had happened. "How could you, Mama?" she asked her mother, who bluntly ignored her and walked into her room. Anita could not understand what she had done to her mother to deserve such level of wickedness from her. A day that was supposed to be a happy day for her suddenly turned to her worst. Anita stood by the wall, grieving the rejection that she had just received, unable to withstand the pain. Anita decided to go visit her friend Jessica, who lived a short distance from her home. "Is everything okay?" Jessica asked Anita, who narrated how her mother ruined her chances of marrying Daniel. "Why would your mother do such a thing to you?" Jessica could not believe her ears. "Are you sure you did not wrong her in any way?" Jessica asked Anita, who could not remember doing anything wrong to her mother. "So, what are you going to do now?" Jessica asked, as Anita revealed to her that she had no other options than to move on with her life, as Daniel is no longer interested in marrying her. Later that night, Anita returned home. To find her mother eating her dinner, she found it shocking to see that her own dinner too was set, after all that happened that faithful day. Anita, in that moment, could not bring herself to eat the food, as her heart was so heavy towards her mother. She stared at her mother for so long, unsure of what to do to her. She expected her mother to explain to her her reasons of doing what she did, but all she saw was her mother, who looked so unbothered about her actions. Anita, in that moment, could feel her anger rising. She decided to ignore her mother as she walked into her dirty room, not caring about the food that her mother had prepared for her to eat. All she could think about was how wicked her mother was for ruining her chances of marrying Daniel, who she believed was a kind and loving man. If only my mother had respected herself, Daniel would have proceeded with the marital rites, Anita thought to herself as tears poured down her eyes. The next morning, Anita sat in her room as she thought of what to do. "I should clean up my room," she thought to herself. But the zeal to do so is completely lost. So she continued to live her life in the pile of dirt that was in her abode. This went on for a while, until one faithful morning when she came across a handsome young man who seemed unable to take his eyes off her. His name was Ben. He was Jessica's brother's friend who just returned from the city to visit his family. Ben was immediately struck by her beauty. He decided to know her. They spent time together, and Ben could not get enough of her. The way she laughed and her charming beauty attracted him to her. Ben asked her to marry him. Anita, without hesitating, accepted his proposal without being afraid of what her mother could do. She spoke to her friend Jessica, who advised her to tidy up her room to ensure that her mother had nothing to say to ruin her chances with Ben. "That's a good idea," Anita concurred, as she went home and began to tidy up her room. She spent hours cleaning up her room. She could not believe the amount of mess that came out of her small room. While she was done cleaning the room, She approached her mother to review that a young man was coming to visit her soon, to ask for her hands in marriage. Anita pleaded with her mother not to ruin her second chance at love. She showed her mother her tidy room, saying that she went through the stress to clean her room, so as to ensure that her dirtiness do not come in the way of her happiness. Her mother looked at her and smiled and asked when the young man will be visiting. Anita was so full of joy as she watched her mother smiled at the clean room. "He will be visiting in 2 days," replied her mother, who quickly ran to the market to buy some items that they will need to entertain their visitor. Anita could not help but dance with joy. She approached her friend Jessica. Jessica was so happy to see the joy in her friend's eyes. "It seems you love him so much," she asked Anita, who could not help but smile as she gushed over Ben in excitement. The day finally arrived, and Anita could not contain her joy. She insisted to cook the pepper soup that the visitors were going to eat. Her mother was so happy to see how excited she looked, and she asked her a few questions about Ben, and Anita found herself spilling all the interesting thing about Ben to her mother, who stood there and listened to her. After a few hours, Anita finished cooking the pepper soup and called her mother to come have a taste. She looked so excited to hear what her mother thought about her cooking, and was so shocked to hear that the soup tasted so horrible. What? Anita dished some soup in a plate to taste and spat it out immediately. It was only a few minutes before their visitors arrived, and her mother, seeing how worried she looked, decided to quickly prepare another batch of pepper soup for them. Anita was so grateful to her mother. As she thanked her and rushed off to prepare for the arrival of their visitor, her mother remained in the kitchen and quickly prepared another pot of pepper soup. Just as she finished, she heard a knock on their door and called on Anita to go welcome their visitors, as she quickly rushed to her room to go change into a befitting dress. Anita was so excited to see Ben and his family in her home. She ushered them in and ensured that they are comfortable, as her mother quickly rushed into the kitchen to dish some food for their visitors. She called on Anita to serve them the food, and Anita did as instructed. With a smile on her face, Anita served the pepper soup to Ben and his family. They all took a sip, and immediately the expression on their faces changed. Ben coughed slightly, trying to hide his discomfort, but it was evident that the soup was horrible. Ben's mother, trying to remain polite, asked who prepared the soup, and before Anita could respond, her mother interrupted and said Anita made the soup herself, as she wanted to impress them all with her cooking skill. Anita stood there frozen, her heart sinking, as she realized what her mother had just done. She had served the horrible batch of soup that Anita made, not the second batch that her mother made to fix the situation. Ben, looking so embarrassed and disappointed, set his spoon down as he voiced out his displeasure and the fact that Anita do not know how to cook. "How do you plan on getting married without knowing how to cook?" he asked Anita, who stood there embarrassed as she watched the mother and father walked out of their house disappointed without mincing any word. Ben informed Anita that their marriage plans cannot proceed. She should learn how to cook first before becoming a wife. He said to her as he walked out of her home to go join his parents. Anita was so much vile, she looked at her mother and could not believe what she had done. Her heart ached as tears streamed down her face. "Why, Mama? Why would you sabotage me again? I cleaned, I tried, I did everything right this time." Her mother ignored her and walked into her room, leaving her there in distress. Anita screamed out in pain. She could not understand why her mother seemed to be so mean to her all of a sudden. "Are you really my mother?" she screamed out loud as she locked herself up in a room, questioning how a mother would be so cruel as to cause her own daughter this much pain. A pain that seems so unnecessary, as though there was a lingering beef between them. "I can't take this anymore," Anita said to herself as she left their home angrily and went to see her friend Jessica, who could not understand why all these were happening. "Have you tried to speak to your mother to know why all these are happening?" Jessica asked Anita, who screamed out in anger that she hated her mother and wished that should could die. Everywhere felt silent as her words sound ill, and she burst out in tears. Anita, in that moment, decided not to fall in love again, to avoid going through the touch of heartbreak, knowing that her mother might never allow her to get married. "I think it is best I remain single and stop falling in love. This way I will save myself from potential heartbreak," she said to Jessica, who advised her to speak to her mother instead, to know why she was chasing her suitors away. "Never. My mother means nothing to me from this moment, and I will make sure I stay out of her way and never involve her in any of my businesses," Anita said as she stood up and headed back home. She arrived home a few moments later and walked straight to her room, not caring if her mother was home or not, as she made up her mind never to speak or care for her mother again. They lived under the same room, but as strangers who barely acknowledge each other's presence. This silence treatment continued for months, ruining the once peaceful relationship between mother and daughter. During this time, Anita met a young man named Chima, who declared an interest on her. Chima was such a handsome and charming man. She saw Anita one evening helping a little girl who had fell and bruised her knees. Chima stood from a distance and watched as Anita carefully nursed the bruised knee and assisted the little girl home. On her way back, he approached her and tried to know her better, but Anita did not seem interested in him. However, Chima did not give up. Every evening, he ensured that he stood by the road that led to Anita's house, hoping to have a word with her, but Anita ignored him, acting like he was invisible. One evening, Anita was taking a stroll with her friend Jessica when Chima approached her and tried to speak to her, but as usual, she ignored him, and all effort by him to talk to her grew futile. Jessica, witnessing what had happened, asked Anita what all that was about, and Anita reviewed to her that the young man had tormented her life for weeks and that she was tired of his constant disturbance. Jessica, however, saw things differently. "Why don't you chase him away once and for all by showing him all terrible side? Trust me, he will run away at the first inconvenience." "Wow, that's a great idea," Anita agreed with her friend as she decided to go ahead with the plan. The next day, as she returned home, Chima approached her again to talk to her, but this time, Anita replied her with a smile. They spoke for a few minutes, and Chima was so delighted to finally speak with her. As the day went by, Chima and Anita spent time getting to know each other. She realized that Chima was a medical doctor who recently moved to their village to work in one of the big hospitals. He spoke about himself and the fact that he grew up with his poor mother, who owned a very big restaurant in their village. Chima grew up working for his mother in her restaurant and perfected his cooking skill in the process. And also a very good cook, Anita boosted to him as she invited him to her house the next day to have a taste of her meal. Chima was so delighted as he accepted her invitation immediately. Anita laughed in her heart because she knew that her cooking will definitely chase him away, going with the fact that he was a fantastic cook. The next day came, and Anita prepared a pot of pepper soup, the same type she prepared for Ben and his family on their first visit. Chima arrived her home and met her mother, who seemed shocked to see a young man in their home. She ushered him in and retired to her room, leaving him with Anita, who served a plate of her terrible pepper soup. Chima, delighted to taste the soup, took his first spoon and paused for a second. Anita laughed in her heart as she tried so hard not to press out the laughter. He took a second spoon and paused for another 5 seconds before finishing the soup. Anita looked at him shocked as she wondered how he was able to drink such a horrible soup. How did it taste? Anita asked him purposely to hear what he had to say about the soup. "I have never actually had this type of soup before," he replied Anita as he explained the uniqueness of its taste. Anita excused herself as she rushed off to her room to laugh. "This is just the beginning. I'm sure after today you will leave me alone in peace," she said as she laughed to her heart's contempt. A few minutes later, she returned to the living room and met the room empty. Chima was nowhere to be found, and Anita could not believe how fast he gave up on her. She felt a mix of relief and regret as a part of her hope that he would stay. But Anita immediately shook off the feelings as she convinced herself that it was for the best. Her mother walked up to her, but Anita ignored her completely. As she returned to her room, banging the door behind her, the anger in her heart for her mother have not seemed to die down. As Anita decided within herself never to forgive her mother for all the terrible things that she did to her. The next morning, Anita paid a visit to her friend Jessica, narrating all that happened with Chima. Jessica was so shocked to hear that Chima built on her, considering how persistent he seemed at first. A few days passed and Anita saw no sign of Chima. She accepted her sad fate and moved on, trying not to allow another rejection to face her. Her mother tried on many occasions to talk to her, but she was so unwilling to hear what her mother had to say. She left the house and went to her friend's place, Jessica, who advised her to give her mother a listening ear, but Anita found herself fuming in anger, as she remembered all the pain that her mother caused her for no just reason. "She must suffer the way she made me suffer," Anita said, refusing to listen to the counsel of her friend. Later that evening, Anita returned home and met Chima, standing in front of her house. "What are you doing here?" She asked Chima, who looked shocked to hear her question. "Is anything the problem?" He asked Anita, who yelled at him angrily and called him all sort of condescending names. "How dare you show your face here after billing out on me the other day?" she said to Chima, who asked if her mother never delivered his message to her. Anita froze in shock, as she never knew that Chima left a message for her with her mother. "That might be the reason why my mother had been trying to speak with me," she thought to herself as she asked him the reason why he decided to bill out on her the other day. "I had an emergency at the hospital," Chima said to Anita, who began to apologize to him for all the horrible things she said to him. Immediately, they heard a loud sound inside the house and wondered what it could be. "What is that?" Chima asked Anita, as they quickly rush in to confirm the origin of the sound. To their surprise, they saw Anita's mother laying on Anita's untidy room. Her mother slumped on the floor in her room, and Chima had to rush into her dirty room to attend to her mother, who was laying there unconscious. "We need to rush her to the hospital immediately," Chima said as they quickly rushed their mother to the hospital. Anita stood there frozen as she watched her mother struggle for her life. All the anger and resentment she hoarded in her heart fizzled away and were replaced with regret. "What was I thinking to ignore my own mother for this long?" Anita asked herself as tears dropped from her eyes. Chima approached her to review that her mother was in critical condition. "Will she be all right?" Anita asked as Chima looked her in the eyes, unable to give a definite answer. "Your mother have a 50-50 chance of survival," he said to Anita, whose heart began to race in fear. At that point, nothing else matters, as Anita felt her heart sink with each passing second. A few minutes later, she was escorted into the emergency room, where her mother laid pale and weak, barely conscious. Taking her mother's hand, Anita began to apologize to her for all the terrible thing that she did to her, not knowing that she was sick. Her mother, with a faint voice, spoke out to her, apologizing for being too harsh to her. "It was never about you, Anita. I was just trying to protect you the best way I could, as I couldn't stand and watch you make the same mistake I made in the past. What has happened was that so many years ago, Anita's mother got married to a man who made her life a living hell. He treated her so badly because she held all her flaws from him, presenting herself as a completely different person. However, when he began to see her flaws, he transformed into a monster and made her life a living hell. Their marriage, however, ended shortly before Anita was born, and seeing the pain that she went through in her own life, she decided never to allow her own daughter pass through such pain. This was the reason why she was so harsh, ensuring that Anita's suitor knew all of her flaws beforehand. She believed that if a man could accept Anita with all her imperfection, then he will truly love and cherish her for who she was. Her approach, although misguided and harsh, was rooted in desire to protect her daughter from the same kind of pain and disappointment she had endured. Anita listened to her mother. As tears poured down her eyes, she realized the depth of her mother's love, which was expressed in such a painful and confusing way. Her heart filled with sorrow for the misunderstandings that led to the resentment and neglect on her part. "I'm so sorry, Mama. I never understood your reasons," Anita said, as she squeezed her mother's hand, apologizing for all the terrible things she did. Her mother smiled weakly as tears poured down her eyes. "I'm sorry, my daughter. I should have explained everything to you, but I could not stand to see you broken by the constant heartbreak. My heart could not take it. That was why I ignored you," she said to Anita, as she told her to promise her that she will marry a man who truly loves her regardless of her flaws. And Anita made the promise to her mother when everywhere went silent. "Mama, Mama," Anita called out as she noticed her mother's body stifling. "Doctor," she screamed out loud as the doctors and nurses flooded the room. Anita noticed her world stopped in that instant. Her mother was dead. Chima quickly rushed to her to comfort her. "No!" she screamed, as she immediately remembered the day she wished for her mother to die. "No, I killed my mother," Anita cried out loud, as Chima held her tightly and reassured her that she had no hand in her mother's death. His words, although kind, but barely penetrated her vein of sorrow in the days that followed. Anita laid her beloved mother to rest, mourning her loss deeply. She hoped that the love her mother had always wished for would one day find its way into her life. Though Chima stayed by her side throughout her grieving period, Anita couldn't shake off the fear that his presence was driven by pity. She recalled the harsh words she had spoken to him, and all her flaws that had been exposed to him as well. Anita wondered if a man like him could truly see a future with a woman like her. Just as she sat there thinking, she heard a knock on her door. Jessica burst into her home, urging Anita to follow her quickly. They both dashed out, with Anita's heart racing in fear. "What's wrong?" she asked, her anxiety growing with each step that she took. "It's Chima," Jessica replied. Anita's panic deepened as she feared what might have happened to him. "Is he okay?" she asked Jessica, who told her that something had happened to him and only Anita had the power to save him. Anita's heart raced as they both ran to Chima's home and met him down on one knee with a ring stretched out in his hand. "Will you marry me?" he asked Anita, who could not believe her eyes. "Is this a joke?" she asked Chima, who assured her of his love for her. "I want to be with you, Anita, to heal and build a future with you," he said, as tears poured down her eyes. The heartbreak she had experienced, the misunderstanding with her mother, and the moment of intense loneliness all led up to this moment of unexpected joy. "Yes, Chima, yes, I will marry you," Anita finally said, as Chima slipped the ring into her finger and stood up to embrace her as they both cried for joy and held each other in their arms. That was how Anita found the perfect love with a man who loved her despite all her flaws. They got married, and Anita learned how to cook under the guidance of her lovely husband, who held her hands all through the way. They supported each other, and as the years went by, Anita became a better version of herself. The lesson to learn from this story is that true love goes beyond physical attraction and appearance. It also embraces a person's flaws and imperfections. Anita's journey teaches us that genuine love is built on honesty, understanding, and mutual growth. It is important to confront and walk through personal weaknesses rather than hide them, as this fosters stronger relationship and personal development. Additionally, the story reviews the importance of clear communication and understanding between people, as misunderstanding can lead to unnecessary pain and suffering, and also the story highlights the value of resilience and self-improvement, showing that it is never too late to learn, change, and become a better version of oneself. Finally, be watchful of the utterances you make when angry, so as not to live a life of regret. I hope you enjoyed the story. Hello guys, thank you for watching. I know you enjoyed it. Please kindly subscribe to this channel. New stories are uploaded on this channel every day. We have one interesting story coming up tonight. Please subscribe so that you won't miss it. God bless you as you subscribe. I love you guys.